Emergency personnel, including firefighters from North America and Europe, are volunteering to stand with Israel in times of crisis. These lovers of Zion are training to fly to Israel at short notice in case of war or natural disaster. Hard-pressed Israeli firefighters and rescue workers are grateful for the support.
And we are short in firefighters. We have less firefighters in the vehicle from all the world that you know. In the world, it's and every 1,000 people where you have firefighter. In Israel, it's 7,000 people on one firefighter. We need the volunteers. We need people who come to support us if there is a war or if there is a fire, a bushfire, like the Carmel fire.
The Emergency Volunteers Project, or EVP, is the organization behind this effort of preparing rescue personnel from around the world to comfort Zion, proactively in the hour of need.
We learned that firefighters all over the world, they are brothers. They're the same breathing smoke, you can call it. And exactly how we do it, we can train them, and they can learn the job, and they can help us a lot.
Adi Zahavi is the EVP International Director. I interviewed him at the Joseph Storehouse in the Judean Hills near Jerusalem. Adi Zahavi, you're International Director for EVP. What does EVP stand for?
EVP stands for the Emergency Volunteers Project. The project purpose is to create teams of first responders from around the world willing to deploy in Israel in times of emergency and war.
What kind of emergencies would Israel, in fact, need volunteers for?
There are two purposes for the EVP project. We will need volunteers in times of war, as intelligence expect the next war that Israel will face will be 3-4 times bigger than the one we had in 2006 in Israel. And any kind of emergency situation like a big earthquake that Israel is preparing herself to deal with. Then of course we're talking about big numbers of volunteers that we will need to stand and help Israel.
We saw recently in the situation in the north of Israel with the Carmel fires a lack of manpower, equipment, things like that. Is this something that EVP can support and network with, even in terms of firefighting?
The EVP has a number of volunteers groups. One of them is the firefighters. We are looking to recruit and train firefighters and rescue teams. So they would be able to come and help the 1,200 firefighters that are in Israel. In Israel we have around 1,200 firefighters on a population of 7.5 million people. You're talking about one firefighter for every 10,000 people. In the blaze that we had in the Carmel up north of Israel, we have managed to control the fire with the existing teams that we had in Israel. We had a scenario of 3 days. But what will happen when we'll have a war for 30 days, for 35 days, when we know that we are going to expect 10,000s of missiles launching and hitting Israel? Houses, building apartments, kindergartens, malls. Then the firefighters are going to work 24/7 for 30 days, and the 1,200 firefighters are not enough.
Now, it is expected that any national crisis, whether an earthquake, another fire, or a war, will demand all our attention. How will volunteers be prepared when they come from abroad? Is EVP doing something to prepare them for entering a crisis situation, which will be much different than they face in their own home countries?
When we talk about emergency situation in any country, we have to understand that the whole system of the country is changing. And in Israel, we have experienced terror incidents, wars, different kinds of emergency, and Israel learned to look to the future and to be prepared. And this is exactly what we are going to do with our volunteers. It is not enough for a volunteer to say, I would like to volunteer in Israel in emergency. I would like to aid and help the Jewish community and the population of Israel. They need to be prepared. They need to know how the emergency system in Israel works.
Mm-hmm.
They need to understand the different kinds of scenarios they can find themselves in, and they need to drill different scenarios that they will probably support and help. If we are talking about bomb shelter teams, people that will go from shelter to shelter, if we are talking about distribution aid volunteers, if we are talking about psychologists, social workers, if we are talking about firefighters, all of the volunteers will have to be trained in their home communities by Israeli teams that will fly and will train them between 2 days to a week.
Mm-hmm.
They will get all the information they need. Each volunteer will have to participate in a training.
Mm-hmm.
A training that we are going to conduct.
Mm-hmm.
A training that we are conducting in the home communities of the volunteers. We are sending special teams from the different emergency services. We train the volunteers and we give them all the tools they need to understand what is going to happen in Israel in times of war and emergency. We do not want them to land in Ben Gurion, Tel Aviv, and the first thing that they will hear is a siren or a missile falling hit.
And then return to their home.
And then
out of
return
fear.
to their home. And Israel will need help.
Tell me, Adi, what is the actual national preparedness in terms of the bomb shelters that will have to take in thousands, tens of thousands of people in the time of war?
Every emergency department, every municipality, every mayor and leaders of the communities in Israel are taking all the measures to make sure that the shelters will be ready and the people that will need to go to the shelters in emergency times will have a place to go to.
Now, but what happens if you're talking 30, 35 days, even possibly being in a shelter? What about food? What about clothing? What about water?
That's exactly where the EVP volunteers come into the picture. The EVP volunteers are going to work with the emergency teams of each municipality. They're going to work in the municipality distribution centers. They're going to accept the food, they're going to collect the food, they're going to arrange the food in boxes and take it, deliver it to the shelters every single day. The people that are in the shelters cannot go out. They're afraid to go out. I would afraid, you would afraid to go out. So in times of emergency, the EVP volunteers would go to the shelters and will show the people that cannot go out that help is on the way.
What about entertainment? What do we do for people who are locked in with all this kind of fear around them?
In 2006, when we had the war with Lebanon, in north of Israel, I've spent days and days going from shelter to shelter and checking people as an ambulance driver, and I can promise you that there's nothing more than going into a shelter and take 5-year-old child, put him on your lap and give him a candy and sing a song. You have to understand, when people are in shelters for hours, for days, you're talking about 100, 150 people in one room for 24 hours. If you can go into the shelter, if you're a singer, if you're a clown, if you're a musician, if you're good with cards, and you can go into the shelter and take the kids for 20 minutes, half an hour, and put a smile on their face, I think you have conquered the world. And this is one of the teams that the EVP is working with. We have entertainment teams that will go from shelter to shelter for half an hour each shelter, and we'll try to give some break.
Let me ask you, about the firefighting services. In other words, actual teams will be raised up of professional firefighters already who will connect with the Israeli firefighters. Is that correct?
The EVP Firefighters for Israel project is started in 2010. We have already trained 100 firefighters from different states, mainly in the United States. And the idea is that when the time comes, those teams will fly to Israel within 72 hours, will be divided to stations, and will work with the Israeli teams on the fire trucks and would be able to respond to any scenario that they will be needed in. One of the lessons that we in the EVP learned from the last fire blaze that we had up north in the Carmel is that to have 100 firefighters in the United States that can be deployed in Israel starting with the 30th hour is great. But if you can have firefighter volunteers or any kind of volunteer from Europe that can be on the ground of Israel after 15 hours or 20 hours, that is a winning card. And this is what the EVP put for a goal in the next few months. We would like to approach communities in Europe and ask them to join the fabulous emergency teams of the EVP, to stand with Israel in times of emergency and to say with us our slogan, help is on the way.
Adi, tell me, you actually took a team of 7 firefighters and people here from Israel to train together with firefighters in the United States. What all happened during that time?
Well, I'm happy to say that in 2010 we had 3 trainings in Israel and in the United States. Last November in 2010 we came back from a training in Garland, Texas, when we trained 50 firefighters to know how to work with the Israeli system in times of emergency. We do not train firefighters how to work and how to be a firefighter, but we do want to show them how we do things in Israel so they will know what to expect in time of emergency. We took a team of 7 people, 7 firefighters from the Israeli Fire and Rescue Services, along with the EVP team. We trained for 6 days, hands-on training in the Garland Fire Training Facility. We drilled different kind of scenarios. We used fire trucks, we used Israeli equipment, and we used equipment that we had in Texas, in the United States, and together we created a fabulous training. During that time we also met with different fire chiefs, and we basically created a strong bond between Israel Fire and Rescue Services and the Texas firefighters. A connection that will continue and will be maintained for years to come, with or without emergency in Israel.
What type of volunteers are you looking for, and what categories?
We're looking for firefighters, rescue personnel, infrastructure teams, constructors, plumbers, electricians. We're looking for people that can work in the distribution aid centers and collect and distribute food. We're looking for entertainment teams. We're looking for singers, clowns, musicians. We're looking for nurses, paramedics, EMTs. You just name it. In times of emergency, we will need them all. Anyone that thinks that he can support and help, please, I urge him to contact us today.
Adi Zahavi, I know listening to all the stories, seeing all the footage of the emergencies and the crises that Israel faces, I would be one person who's ready to volunteer. And I know that if I was living abroad, I wouldn't hesitate to contact you. Thank you so much for being with us and for taking time out of a very busy schedule.
Barry, thank you very much for having me, and God bless you all. Shalom.
Shalom.